Deep in the mountains of western Virginia, where the fog weaves through century-old pines and time appears to have halted in 1920, there exists a place America chose to forget. Odd, a small rural Appalachian community, has become synonymous with what modern society deems an absolute taboo: generations of marriages between direct relatives. The Whittaker family property is reached by a narrow, irregular dirt road, flanked by rusty trailers and wooden houses that defy the laws of gravity. GPS ceases to function kilometers before arrival, as if technology itself refuses to acknowledge this place. In 2020, photographer and documentary filmmaker Mark Leiter ventured into these mountains with a camera and a haunting question: how does an entire family survive decades of consanguineous marriages? What he discovered was a reality that challenges any fiction. The Whittaker family is not merely an isolated case of consanguinity. They represent the extreme result of generations of geographical isolation, absolute poverty, and traditions perpetuated for over a century. Ray, Lorraine, Timmy, and Freddie Whittaker are siblings who carry in their bodies and minds the physical and mental marks of a genetic lineage turned inward upon itself. Ray, the eldest, has severe physical malformations. His head is disproportionately small, a condition known as microcephaly. He communicates only through grunts and gestures, his intellectual capacity severely compromised. Lorraine, the only sister, has obvious facial deformities and motor difficulties that prevent normal walking. Timmy, though able to speak some words, has a severe intellectual disability. His face bears the unmistakable marks of consanguinity, facial asymmetry, serious dental problems, and an empty gaze that reveals decades of social isolation. Freddie, the youngest, is the only one who can maintain basic conversations, yet even he shows clear signs of cognitive impairment. What is most shocking is not merely the visible deformities, but the naturalness with which this family accepts their condition. For them, this is the only reality they have ever known. There are no mirrors in the house. No television shows other families. No references from the outside world to help them understand how profoundly different they are. Their home is a cluster of rooms without electric light, without running water, without any modern comfort. The smell of mold and abandonment permeates every corner. Piles of trash accumulated for years form mountains of debris in the backyard, making it impossible to distinguish where the garbage ends and their personal belongings begin. To understand how the Whittaker family reached this point, one must return to the 19th century, when the first settlers arrived in the isolated mountains of western Virginia. The Appalachian region has always been defined by extreme geographical isolation. Entire communities formed in deep valleys separated by insurmountable mountains and kilometers of dense forest. The geography here is brutal and merciless. Mountains rising abruptly over 1,200 meters create narrow, isolated valleys where small communities developed their own culture, language, and traditions over generations. Winter snowfalls could completely isolate these communities for months, forcing families to depend exclusively on themselves. Dr. Spencer Wells, a geneticist specializing in isolated populations, explains that when small groups remain geographically isolated for generations, the genetic pool becomes progressively limited. What happened in the Appalachians is a classic example of genetic drift in small founding populations, Wells states. He details the concept of a population bottleneck. When a population is dramatically reduced and remains isolated, it loses available genetic diversity, creating a vicious cycle that leads to obligatory consanguinity. The documented history of the Appalachians is filled with similar examples. The Whittaker family's roots in the region are documented since 1887, when John Whittaker settled in Odd with his wife Sarah. Census records show that by the second generation, marriages between first-degree cousins began. The third generation saw marriages between siblings and half-sisters become common practice, not by choice, but from an absolute lack of options. Archives from the local Methodist Church reveal disturbing details. Reverend Samuel Morrison, who served from 1920 to 1945, kept meticulous records. His personal diaries, discovered in 2019, contain passages describing his growing concern over the irregular unions he was forced to bless. One entry from June 23, 1934, reads, "Today I performed the wedding of Mary Whittaker to her own brother, Henry. Both are children of a union between father and daughter. Divine blessing. He recorded at least 12 such unions in the Whittaker family between 1930 and 1940. The isolation was not only geographical but also cultural, religious, and economic. The Whittakers belonged to a fundamentalist sect that viewed the outside world as sinful. Marrying outside the family was not just impractical, it was considered a betrayal. This sect, known locally as the Church of the Elect, developed a theology that justified and encouraged consanguineous marriages. Doctrinal documents found on the property include sermons interpreting biblical passages as commands to maintain the purity of the lineage. The genetic consequences became apparent in the fourth generation. Medical records from Charleston General Hospital show that between 1920 and 1950, at least 15 Whittaker children were born with severe disabilities, 8 died before age 5. Prolonged consanguinity results in what geneticists call inbreeding depression. Deleterious recessive genes, usually inactive when parents are genetically distant, become dominant when both parents carry the same mutations. Genetic analyses by Dr. Michael Bamshad of the University of Washington revealed the modern siblings have a consanguinity coefficient of 0.355, meaning they are genetically closer than normal siblings. This suggests at least 3 consecutive generations of very close relative pairings, explains Dr. Bamshad. This extreme homozygosity results in multiple deleterious recessive genes expressing simultaneously. Dr. Sarah Martinez of Johns Hopkins describes the situation as the human equivalent of a highly inbred laboratory lineage. Detailed tests revealed the siblings carry at least 23 different recessive mutations in a homozygous state, all expressed at once. The malformations are just the tip of the iceberg. They also suffer from congenital heart problems, partial deafness, chronic kidney issues, and a severely compromised immune system. Ray has severe epilepsy. Lorraine has constant respiratory difficulties. These 4 are paradoxically the less severe cases. Church documents indicate at least 7 other siblings were stillborn or died in childhood from incompatible malformations. The perpetuation of consanguinity cannot be understood as mere individual choice. It is the result of a complex system of isolation, poverty, and ignorance that fed itself for over a century. Betty Whittaker, a distant cousin who escaped in the 1970s, offers a shocking account. The girls got pregnant with their own brothers, fathers, or uncles, and that was seen as normal, she says. Betty describes a ceremony called the Blessing of Purity where the family patriarch would assign a male relative as a girl's guardian at age 14, granting him exclusive reproductive rights. Resistance was met with severe punishment. My younger sister Rebecca, the 3rd time she tried to escape, they broke her legs with a hammer. She died at 23, giving birth to her 5th son. All 5 babies were from our own father. Social assistance records show that between 1960 and 2000, at least 23 Whittaker children had the same father listed as their mother's own father or brother. The legal system largely ignored these irregularities. Formal education never existed for Ray, Lorraine, Timmy, and Freddie. They cannot read, write, or perform basic math. Their only knowledge of the world comes from equally isolated relatives. Tragically, the cycle continues. Freddie has had at least 2 relationships with first-degree cousins, resulting in 1 child who died at 3 months and a second pregnancy that ended in miscarriage. The family survives on roughly $800 monthly in disability benefits, depending on church charity for food and clothing. The nearest health unit is 45 kilometers away, and they have no transportation. Their existence is silent and without perspective. My first reaction was pure shock, admits Mark Leiter. But then came the question, how could a family in such extreme conditions remain invisible for so long? He describes the difficulty of initial communication and his realization of their profound limitations. Raleigh County, where the Whittakers live, is one of the poorest regions in Western Virginia. Internal documents from the Department of Social Services reveal authorities were aware of the family's situation for decades but consciously chose to ignore it. At least 8 social workers' reports between 1985 and 2005 described subhuman conditions and recommended intervention, but each was filed without action. The educational system also failed completely. Attempts to get the children to school in the 1980s were frustrated by their condition and family resistance. The local community holds an ambiguous view of the Whittakers. Some show compassion, others see them as a shameful curse. This fatalistic resignation stifled intervention for decades. The Whittaker story transcends sensationalism. It is about American rural poverty, institutional negligence, and the systematic abandonment of marginalized populations. Subsequent studies reveal the Whittakers are not an isolated case in Appalachia. Dr. Robin Bennett notes that in such extreme consanguinity, the chance of severe birth defects exceeds 50%. Media attention has brought some minor improvements: donations allowed for a generator, a functional bathroom, and more regular medical care. But it also turned them into a macabre tourist attraction, raising complex ethical questions. The Whittaker family serves as a dire warning. They are the extreme result of social trends that affect thousands of families in the region, says social anthropologist Dr. Williams, who has documented 47 other families in Appalachia with significant consanguinity histories. Research shows consanguinity rates in isolated mountain communities can be 15 to 20 times higher than national averages. The true lesson of the Whittaker family is not in its deformed genetics, but in what its existence reveals about the deep failures of a society that refuses to care for its most vulnerable, the narrative concludes. Dr. Bennett offers a dark perspective. From a scientific view, they represent what happens when natural selection is artificially suspended by social support. Their persistence comes at an immeasurable human cost. Today, as you watch this story comfortably, the Whittaker brothers remain in their home without electricity, without hope, and without a future. They are ghosts of an America we prefer to pretend does not exist. The Whittaker family will die in silence as they lived. But their history remains a permanent testimony to what happens when a society decides some lives do not matter enough to be saved. Their lives pose a direct question to our collective conscience. If a society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable, what does the existence of the Whittaker family say about who we really are?